You can never invest enough in innovation. We're really passionate about doing a lot of the work up front to really inform well thought through new product development, because after all, innovation is expensive. It costs a lot of money and it doesn't always work. So you need to be ambitious. You need to take risks. You need to have a test and learn mindset and try things out. Otherwise you get left behind.
You're listening to Food Tech Talk, supply chain insights from farm to fork, a podcast discussing the latest trends and technology in the food and supplement industries, featuring conversations with regulatory experts, quality and safety champions, and thought leaders across the industry. I'm your host, Lydia Adams. Let's jump right in. Hello. On today's episode of Food Tech Talk, supply chain insights from farm to fork, we're delighted to welcome Lisa Harris and Alex Hayes, co-founders and senior consultants at Harris & Hayes, a leading food consultancy firm with over 20 years of combined experience in the food and beverage industry. Harris & Hayes deliver in-depth food trend reports, strategy, and consumer insights that keep businesses ahead of the curve. They have a deep understanding of food trends and are passionate about helping their clients innovate smarter and stay relevant in a dynamic industry. Lisa and Alex both draw on a wealth of experience in innovation and strategy, including work with multinationals like Unilever, Diageo, big UK retailers like Sainsbury's and Marks & Spencer, as well as challenger brands and startups. Welcome to the show, Lisa and Alex.
Thank you. Thank you.
So before we get started into our main topic, I just kind of wanted to find out a little bit more about you guys. So could you both share your respective journeys in the food and beverage industry and kind of what drew you to this field?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess food has always been a lifelong obsession of mine, if I'm honest. I've always been an eater, but I turned it into a profession when I started out working in food journalism. And that was starting with a food magazine that I launched and writing for Time Out and The Guardian and Sunday Times. And I then moved into content marketing and became head of food content for Sainsbury's, which really kind of gave me this insight into retail and how retailers are working, and also pushed me into that strategy and trends side of things a lot more. And then I left there to set up Harris & Hayes with Alex. I think it was about 2018 now, and I've never looked back.
Before collaborating with Lisa and founding Harris & Hayes, I had quite a varied food and drink industry career. So I started out at Jamie Oliver in his head office, really supporting him on shoots with book campaigns and beyond. And then I quite quickly moved into new product development. And I really made it my mission to get a lot of varied experience in the industry. I worked in hospitality for Marks & Spencer's, like you mentioned, and in the innovation hub for quite a large UK food manufacturer. I've always been really passionate about innovation and progress, so beyond food as well, so fashion and other industries. And the more I got to kind of understand this kind of fast-paced world, the more I loved it.
What's a defining moment that you guys each have that really has changed your approach to your current consultancy and food trend analysis?
I think it's hard to sort of pick one defining moment, but when I was sort of thinking about this question, I think really sustainability, we've really seen that shift over the time that we've been working in food innovation. So for example, in the early days, the clients we were working with, it was a bit like sustainability was kind of like the cherry on the top or the icing on the cake. People would kind of just tag it on at the end. And now we're really seeing that clients are seeing it's a really kind of a core ingredient. It's something that's really fundamental. It's definitely really fundamental to us. And so that I think has been quite, not necessarily a defining moment, but just sort of a defining change that we're seeing in terms of the work and how people are approaching sustainability when it comes to innovation.
For me, working with Jamie Oliver and that kind of food education and grounding really shaped and cemented my food career. So seeing him innovate and breathe new life into kind of traditional recipes and little tweaks and hacks to make something easier or tastier or healthier or more cost effective was really fascinating to me. And you have to really continually innovate and move on, and have the right kind of open mindset, and commitment to investment is really key.
And obviously you guys have taken your backgrounds and you've moved it into Harris & Hayes. So Lisa, could you maybe share a little bit more about what you guys do together at your company now?
In terms of where we came from, as you can tell from our backgrounds, Alex and I are both really passionate about food, and we love the freedom and the creativity that really comes with running our own business. So no 2 days are never the same. We often don't know what we're doing, a couple of sort of weeks down the line, sort of responding to briefs. But the food industry is impacted by so many different global pressures, whether it's economic or political, ecological. And when you throw trends in there, it's easy for clients to get kind of confused and I think sort of overwhelmed really with where they should be going and what should happen next. It's quite a confusing landscape. And so what Alex and I really wanted to do was to really kind of light the way for people, help them understand what matters now, what's happening next in the industry. And so what we really do, why we created Harris and Hayes, was to offer this kind of bespoke foresight to clients in the food and drink industry. And so we do a lot of ideation, we do a lot of new product development as well for brands that are perhaps looking to launch new concepts. And we're working with retailers, we work in hospitality, the media, perhaps they're looking for expert insights on things, flavor houses, FMCG brands and beyond, and really about helping people sort of stay ahead of the curve. And whilst we've got a lot of contacts in the food industry, there's not actually a lot of people that necessarily do exactly what we do. And we find that people often come to us when they're wanting to launch something new, but they don't quite know how to do it. And so we kind of come in with the answers, giving them a bit of shape to the innovation.
And Alex, I know you've worked with some really iconic brands throughout your career. How has that experience really shaped your approach to innovation and the way that you consult with clients today?
That's a good question. And I think a couple of those brands kind of stand out. M&S, Marks and Spencer's, the full name, and Jamie Oliver, they really kind of invested significant amounts into innovation and they weren't afraid to take risks. And that's really stayed with me. And that's something Lisa and I really encourage our clients to do. You can never invest enough in innovation. We're really passionate about doing a lot of the work up front to really inform well thought through new product development, because after all, innovation is expensive. It costs a lot of money and it doesn't always work. So you need to be ambitious, you need to take risks, you need to have a test and learn mindset and try things out. Otherwise you get left behind. We like this phrase as well, kind of play around the edges. So it's very important for clients to cater to their core customers. And they might do that, say, 80% of the time, but 20% of the time, they need to take those risks. They need to play around the edges. They need to experiment and test and learn. So that's something that we really encourage at Harris and Hayes.
Play around the edges. I love that. So what is the role of a food consultant and how important is that in the current landscape of the food and beverage industry?
How Alex and I often describe it is bringing the outside in. We like to think of ourselves as a bit of a breath of fresh air, I suppose, and a really new perspective. And clients really value that. And so especially in multinationals, Alex and I have both worked with big retailers. We've both worked in big companies. We know how easy it is. You get bogged down or restricted by red tape, or you just don't have that time to be innovative and to seek out creativity, even if that's part of your job description. And so that's kind of where we come in. We get to do the fun stuff. And so, we spend a lot of time staying up to date with trends. We're always out eating, looking out, seeing what's happening next, what restaurants are opening, reading about new flavors, following the careers of young chefs, and really kind of having all of that information at our fingertips. That's our job, to kind of be out there connected with the industry, so that when someone calls up and wants to know what the future of plant-based is, we've got that information readily at our fingertips and we can kind of help them. I guess often the other image is the sort of tip of the iceberg. So we've got all of that information, all of that knowledge underneath. And what we give to the client is a real distillation of what the trends are and what really matters, what they need to think about strategically, sort of now and next.
Yeah, and just to add that a food consultant is quite a broad term and it's used to describe lots of different jobs. So it's not always that clear. We specialize very much in what we call the front end of the innovation process. So the insight, the discovery phase, we call it, and the creative development that really informs what comes next. Other food consultants, they might develop recipes, they might be in the kitchen, but we tend to hand over to the product developers at that point. We almost kind of set the roadmap and then they follow it.
And it's almost providing them with that information that they need to go to the next level with make a data-driven decision, it sounds like.
Exactly.
So, Alex, you've been recognized for your work in next-gen preparedness for family enterprises. So could you share an example of how you successfully implemented this into a food-related business?
Yeah, so there wasn't a great deal of advice or guidance out there when Lisa and I started out on our journey navigating our food careers. So we're really passionate about supporting the next gen kind of coming through into the business. I devised programs for food and family businesses, and that is really to engage their next gen and really support them in becoming well-informed shareholders. And activities might be based around key pillars as a way to structure these programs. So that might be about staying connected, That could be connected to history and family archives and keeping that alive. It could be connected to other family businesses as well. Also about staying relevant. So that's via industry news, via networks, personal development. So there's lots of different pillars. And there are consultants that are very specifically do work with family businesses, but they tend to really focus on governance. They focus on family business structures. But I think there's a real bespoke food industry lens is really important. And there was a real almost kind of gap in the market for that and providing that guidance and providing that support. So it's something that we really enjoy supporting the next generation.
And when you think about kind of starting your own consultancy like you guys have, I'm sure there's a lot that goes into who we are as a company. So, what are the guiding principles that really underpin your approach to food consulting at Harris & Hayes?
Yeah, I think the values are really important, and it's something that we bring through into the innovation. So value, we have to think about it, I guess, from the client side and as well as the customer side. So the client that we're working for, the brand, they'll have their values, whether that's who they are, what they stand for, what their USP really is. But we also really try to make sure that any innovation that we do really meets consumers' values as well. So whether that's cost, relevance, sustainability. And so that kind of idea of value is absolutely kind of core to whatever kind of innovation we're coming up with. And Alex and I also often talk about genuine innovation. I think it's something that you can sort of see. Sometimes people are innovating kind of just for the sake of it. I mean, does the world need another kind of different take on hot cross buns, or a different kind of mince pie? Like actually making sure that we're not just making something for the sake of it. It's not incremental, just, we'll slap a different flavor on it and call it innovation. It has to feel like it's really breakthrough and really disruptive. That's really important for us. And lastly, and this is perhaps the most obvious, but also the most important, is taste. Because if it just doesn't taste good, people aren't going to come back to it. They're not going to be eating it again. And so it really does need to be delicious. So yeah, I'd say in terms of our values of what really governs what we create in Harris & Hayes, I'd say it's about values, about genuine innovation and deliciousness.
And you'd be surprised how much that deliciousness sometimes falls off the radar, doesn't it, Lisa? When especially there's all these pressures around health and pressures around sustainability. And we have to remind clients that, let's not forget, like taste is so paramount. People won't buy it if it doesn't taste great.
Yeah, it's that balance. There's a lot of factors. So obviously you talked about kind of how you deliver these trends. And I'm curious, how do the clients take the information that you provide and stay ahead of the industry trends? And how do they take that information and take it to the next step of what their consumers really want to buy?
Yeah, I mean, we work in various ways, like Lisa's referred to, in kind of how we deliver our work. It could be bespoke reports on a specific category. Could also be linking them up. We do a lot of work linking up innovators and change makers with bigger businesses and joining those dots, connecting those dots, those people really shaping our future of food and actually linking them up with the bigger businesses. We do a lot of safaris, which sounds like lions and tigers and bears, but it's not. It's, going out and about on food safaris and tasting things firsthand. And really, there's nothing like getting out there and tasting things, going back to taste again. And getting out of the office as well. Lisa and I have both worked in roles in permanent positions where you're working in innovation, but you're still quite kind of stuck behind a screen. So we encourage as much as possible to kind of get out there and go on that journey and taste things and experience things. It's really our job to understand their specific challenge. What is their challenge? And how do we deliver the insight and discovery in the best possible way? And it might be by a number of those things, or it might be via one, and really make it really engaging and useful in a way that really resonates with them as a business.
Yeah, definitely. And when you think about these trends and this information that you're providing, how do you determine whether something is a trend or a fad, or how much staying power that it has?
I mean, the trend and fad thing is definitely one of my favorite questions. It's something that I'm quite sort of passionate about. I think because the trend cycles are moving so quickly these days, it can feel like we're moving through more fads than we are trends, and definitely something clients can get confused by, thinking that they need to bring out another unicorn latte or that they need to put out something they've seen on TikTok within a couple of days. And we would sort of generally say that fads are really about repositioning something that already exists. So for example, cottage cheese wraps, I don't know whether you've seen that. It's something on TikTok, people mixing egg with cottage cheese, frying it and turning it into this wrap. And that's something that's, it does sort of feel like a fad because it's taking cottage cheese that already exists and kind of repositioning it because it's low fat and high protein. But something like a trend is really pulling on a kind of a deeper consumer driver. And that's really sort of driving sort of real behavioral change. So say, for example, like for how mushrooms are being used, that we're seeing that in everything from leather to mental health. And so that's like a real trend because it's popping up into multiple disciplines as well. So fashion and food and medicine, snackification, for example, personalization, all of these things are really sort of, we're seeing them in bigger drivers. And so that's perhaps the difference between a fad and a trend, that a trend has much bigger impact than a fad would. But also it's really important to distinguish between trends or like consumer drivers and expressions of trends. So we'll get a report come through saying smash burgers is the next big trend. And yeah, we are seeing a lot of smash burger restaurants are opening. Everyone on TikTok is smashing broccoli, burgers, breakfast, everything. But really what that trend is about personalization. It's about experience economy. And so smash burgers are just an expression of consumers really seeking ways to personalize their food experience. And so it's really important for us that that's where we see clients getting lost in the woods because they're following the sweet smell of smash burgers because they think it's a trend. And actually they need to think, well, what's it tapping into? It's personalization, it's experience. How is that relevant to us? What can we do that taps into that trend? And then it makes it meaningful for them as well, as opposed to just copycat culture, which I think is something that the food and drink industry is really guilty of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's true. If you try to copy someone else rather than think, what's the driving force of this? And then how can I use that for something that's authentic to me and my brand? That's super important.
And that's the genuine innovation thing again, because then that's how you get genuine innovation. Because if brands aren't asking themselves that question, then it's not going to be anything genuine. It's just going to be something else that they've seen but in a different packaging.
Yeah, definitely. And, you spoke about sustainability early on, which I definitely think qualifies as a trend based on what you were talking about. So how have you seen that really play out? And where do you see that going in the future? How are you advising clients about sustainability right now?
We incorporate sustainable and regenerative food practices and innovation wherever we can, and like to use our position in what we're doing to really encourage that. And it's a subject we're really passionate about. So we really challenge clients that we work with. It might be, have they got enough naturally plant-based products in their range? So we might be reviewing their range and their products from that angle. Or could they consider more eco formats? An example that we've been looking at recently, for a drinks brand, can you look at a tablet format that has less of the water and work with these kind of fizzing formats? And some examples we're really proud of include linking up, like I say, change makers with bigger brands. So we linked up quite an industrial international bakery with a regenerative flour supplier. And by making that connection, that can potentially make a huge impact and make a really big difference. We also collaborate with a lot of organizations where we can upskill ourselves and be part of a bigger community, and where we have challenges or there are discussion points and we want to talk to other people in the food industry, then we can have those conversations, and that enables us to move forward. So we work with an organization called the Future Food Movement and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So we're always challenging ourselves in the world of sustainability as well, and feeling like that we're progressing kind of personally and professionally as well.
And besides sustainability, looking ahead to 2025, what are 3 core areas in this industry that businesses should start to pay attention to now?
Well, one thing we're really looking at, seeing a lot, is bold flavors and textures. And this is that kind of sensorial, kind of experiential trend that we've sort of been speaking about. And we're seeing quite a lot of this around there's a phrase that's being used, third culture kids. And so that's kind of a next generation of chefs who perhaps are growing up in a culture that is different from the one that their parents were in. And it's kind of, I guess it's next gen fusion really. And so we're seeing lots of bold flavors, really uncompromising heat. The US especially is really leading in this area. There's condiment brands like Fly by Jing or giving Momofuku a real run for their money. And there's a lot of of kind of innovation, I think, around sort of spice and bold flavor combinations. And I think it taps into something Alex was saying earlier about not being afraid to really sort of play around those edges. And consumers have got an appetite for experience. So sour is a flavor that we're seeing a lot more of. Tang Fastics are this really kind of sour gummy that have overtaken Haribo Star Mix now, because people are really seeking that kind of sour gummy experience. Generally gummies, I think quite a lot. We're seeing people freezing gummy bears, or there's like a gummy bear ice pop or sweet chili gummies. Again, it taps into that textural experience of a little bit sweet and a little bit savory. Also nostalgia of the gummy bear is really kind of coming through in that trend as well. So that's kind of a big thing. And I think also that's tapping into the snackification as well. So, I mean, in the UK, I was just reading something recently, a stat that actually in the UK, more people snack than eat breakfast. So it's really very much kind of entered our mainstream in terms of how we're eating. And so any kind of food innovation that can be formulated into a kind of a snack format, especially for the UK and the German markets, especially where they're really kind of, and US actually as well, which are very snack heavy cultures, that's a really interesting sort of new trend to follow, I'd say, for 2025.
We often talk about kind of surprise and delight, Lisa and I. There's a lot of research and data recently where customers, they want the unexpected, they want something different, and often brands aren't actually satisfying that. So innovation is actually, the rates of innovation since COVID have actually been quite low. And so brands are kind of going that extra mile in terms of flavor and texture, and the unexpected really is worth the payoff. And I think health and sustainability has to kind of be included in that top three, and there's no surprises there. But what's really interesting about that is that the two are coming together. So foods that's naturally better for us is often naturally better for the planet too. So previously they were kind of seen as kind of separate things going on. And actually the intersection is the kind of most interesting kind of part of it. Real mainstreaming of circular food design. We're seeing kind of much more accessible and affordable plant-based that is naturally plant-based. So it's not full of, UPS. We hear a lot over here at the moment about ultra-processed foods, and actually people are wanting a lot kind of cleaner ingredients and naturally plant-based. And of course, kind of much more nutritious and climate-proof crops, which are, a much kind of better alternative and more fit for the future. So lots of areas within that kind of health and sustainability intersection that there's still so much room to innovate and lots to be excited about.
And you can have fun with it as well, because there's a phrase that we've been picking up on recently called chaos packaging. I know it can feel like a lot of the world is in chaos at the moment, but chaos packaging is this idea that you take a familiar product and put it in an unexpected packaging. So olive oil that's sold in a beer can, or sunscreen that looks like it's whipped cream, the kind of squirty cream from a can, or milk in a pouch. And so this is very sort of, to Alex's point about the kind of wanting the unexpected, that feels really playful. It feels quite surprising, a little bit uncomfortable maybe, but some of that is coming from sustainability, because actually it's about reducing the amount of packaging. We're seeing a lot of wine bottles now that are coming through in paper. And so, consumers get that double thrill, I suppose, that double benefit, because they feel like they're getting something exciting and innovative they can enjoy seeing in their fridge or telling their friends about, but also getting that kind of, I guess that sort of pat on the back that it's also more sustainable perhaps as well. And so again, it's where these sorts of different trends are kind of coming together. And I just like this idea that it's coming through from chaos. Chaos is then becoming the sort of source of creativity when it comes to food trends.
Yeah, that is really fun. And just hearing you talk about it, I'm interested in how these trends kind of are global, some of them, and then some of them are specific to different areas. What have you guys seen when you, let's say, come to the United States versus what you're seeing in the UK? And what are the differences and the similarities there?
It depends what we're kind of looking at. So when we're thinking about health, I think there's very much looking at trends. LA, for example, is such a hotspot, and lots of kind of health trends start there. And since Goop and all the noise that kind of generated, and I suppose there's pockets that are of influence, but it kind of depends then what we're looking at very much. So it's very kind of bespoke to the specific subject.
I mean, Korean's been quite interesting. So, obviously David Chang really made Korean, brought fast forwarded Korean food in terms of coming into communities that weren't Korean themselves. And that kind of Momofuku did amazing work with bringing those flavors. And then England, in the UK and Europe has then sort of adopted those things a bit later. And so now we're seeing more Korean flavors and perhaps more niche kind of, tteokbokki or little tube rice cakes and things coming into Marks and Spencer's. And actually it's moved beyond kimchi. I think the UK was sort of stuck on the kimchi crunchy dial. We couldn't do anything else beyond that. And now it's becoming a lot more nuanced. And generally, I think that's something that we're sort of seeing where what nuance looks like in the States potentially, and then what that nuance is then kind of interpreted as in the UK. Also, it's about familiarity as well, I think, in terms of, potentially in the UK, curry or Indian food is something that's much more understood and the nuances of it, whereas perhaps in the US, not so much. So you have to make sure that all of the trends are kind of, especially when it comes to translating international flavors, that it's really relevant and also done, really in a really authentic and informed way, that it's not just something that you kind of just put on without actually having it informed by chefs that are actually from that culture and really understand the food innovation that they're doing.
Yeah, certainly in the UK, everything has felt very London-centric for such a long time, and the rest of the country or the rest of the UK hasn't had the attention it deserves by any means. Now, since COVID, quite a lot of chefs have moved out of the city or as prices have gone up. And so we're really seeing that there's lots of different pockets now, whether that be down in Cornwall or up in Scotland or different cities like Bristol and Manchester, getting much more attention that they deserve, and especially when it comes to great produce and the seas and the countrysides and the farms in Somerset. So that's kind of really refreshing. So it's interesting to look at it from a kind of country-specific angle and also a global angle as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You kind of talked about this a little bit with the sour and the spice and everything, but how are you seeing that consumer needs and behaviors are really driving a lot of these trends in the long run?
I think accountability is a huge thing, and generally we're seeing consumers wanting to hold brands to account a lot more. Social media's got a huge role to play in that. I think brands can't get away with perhaps paying lip service to a particular culture or a particular demographic if it's not really coming from a place of authority, or at least kind of, authenticity, I suppose. So, not greenwashing, not pinkwashing, not making empty promises, but really making sure they're sort of not just putting their money where their mouth is, but their values as well. So accountability, I think, is a really cool thing. And personalization, we've sort of tapped on quite a lot. That's interesting where, in terms of how people experience their life, we live a very personalized sort of algorithmic kind of experience. And so I think food sort of reflecting that, whether that is on a scientific level, the microbiome and how people are understanding that food, we all do respond to food quite differently. And the microbiome is very unique to each of us. And whether it's as nuanced as that, or just the fact that, that I like to drink oat milk and you drink cow's milk, or however we like to kind of mix our food up. So personalization is another really big key, that the brands have to make sure that consumers can kind of use their products and that the brand fits into the consumer's life, not the other way around.
And obviously you guys have been in business together since 2018. What advice would you give to companies that are maybe new to this industry, just starting out? How do you stay relevant, kind of faced with these different consumer preferences that you just talked about?
We touched on quite a lot of this throughout, but very much this test and learn mindset. And that's why you see now so many brands have got their own innovation hubs and incubators and all this kind of language and all these initiatives. And some people have it in-house and they're able to do that, and they're able to play around the edges and satisfy, their core customers, but invest in longer term and test and learn with some kind of innovative ideas. And then the smaller businesses, actually, it's working with people like Lisa and I, and being who are a bit more agile and bring people on as, perhaps they don't have that internal resource or they're not able to, and bringing people on in a flexible basis and really bringing it outside in, as Lisa said, is really important. And I think that external point of view is so important. And having worked in innovation roles where you can get kind of quite bogged down and, ways of doing things and, red tape and all the rest of it, so important to bring in lots of different pairs of eyes and expertise.
And also perhaps looking at what you're known for, and nostalgia is a trend that we've seen, especially with the sort of 90s coming back again and this kind of return of nostalgia, and actually brands kind of returning to their own sort of core values. So, one sort of food trend that we've sort of spotted coming up is these kind of baking mixes kind of coming back, like Betty Crocker sort of style baking mixes, but they're kind of being reimagined, I suppose, for alternative diets or with more functional ingredients. So there's a company called Mixy Boy or Good Mess. And so what they're doing is, Betty Crocker's been around since, forever, not quite, but the 50s. And so it's actually using nostalgia to kind of revisit something, but actually kind of really bring it up to date and be playful and be bold and just kind of say, why not? And so it's not actually, I'm not sure if that is reinventing the wheel, but it's just that idea of actually sort of going back to a familiar space and just doing it better. And the UPF debate, especially, companies are being asked to reformulate cereal, reformulate snacks to meet the requirements in terms of high fat, salt and sugar. And so just making sure that if you're given that opportunity to sort of just to go bold with it, and consumers will reward you. And we do see conversations, especially on social media, perhaps more with the smaller brands, where they're being transparent and saying, we've had to reformulate this. We can't get that ingredient anymore. We're having to increase our prices, and actually kind of engaging in a conversation so that you're not trying to be this kind of perfect, flawless brand, but actually it's a lived conversation and a kind of an experience and a journey with the people that are eating your food. And that's when I think you can get real sort of loyalty and real traction over time.
Yeah, and we work with quite a few heritage brands, and they have to move on. You can satisfy customers that are in a kind of older age bracket, but the reality of life is they're not going to be around forever. And I know that sounds awful, but it's so important that you engage with and are relevant to, and are relevant more often to more people. And that's just a reality. And so it's that careful balance, as Lisa says. And, we talk about finding new in the old, for example, and how you can still pay respect to traditional values and the business that you are, and still really draw on that, but also appeal to a younger audience. Yeah, it's been quite a kind of wobbly time over the last few years, and the change in government here will really hopefully mean that we have more of a reformed food and health strategy, which is something that's a lot of people have been really kind of wanting, the big businesses as well as Lisa and I. And hopefully we're going to start seeing things like more reporting on the healthiness of sales. So businesses will have to report on that, an advertising ban on less healthy foods, maybe more kind of salt and sugar reformulation taxes. So that will hopefully drive some of this. We talked about this intersection with health and sustainability, and we hope that there's kind of real momentum there to kind of drive things forward in a lot of the areas that people are really trying to make progress on. In addition to that, Lisa and I get really excited about what we call these kind of blurring of categories. So yes, we work in food and drink, but actually, as Lisa alluded to, food and drink trends are part of a much bigger picture. And so, for example, we've been working on a butter project recently, and actually we were looking at fashion and we were looking at beauty, and butter is really trending in the beauty world and for eye masks. And, as people are looking for kind of ingredients that they see as pure and they're familiar with and they're used to putting it on their toes. So we get really excited about these kind of intersections again of the blurring of categories, the blurring of lines, and this hype and buzz about ingredients and foods that are actually showing up, and signals are showing up in lots of different areas. And that's often where you get to kind of spot things first and see the potential and the opportunity.
So how can listeners find out more about you guys?
You can follow us on Instagram at Harrison Hayes. On Instagram, you can also find us online, thefoodconsultants.org. The nature of our work means we're working in innovation. We can't always talk about what we're doing. We're not spies. We sound like maybe we are, but it's all a bit top secret. But stuff that we can talk about, projects that we are able to shout about, you'll find them all on our website. And we're often, if you're in the UK, you might see us in the national newspapers. We were just in The Guardian talking about smashed cucumbers or hot honey and various different things. So yeah, keep an eye out for Harrison Hayes, the Food Consultants.
Well, thank you guys both so much for joining. This has been really fun and interesting, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another bite-sized nugget of food tech talk, supply chain insights from farm to fork. To learn more about Trustwell and its technology platform that connects product formulation, nutrition analysis, and compliant labeling with traceability, recall readiness, and supply chain transparency, please visit www.trustwell.com. Thanks for listening.